Gordon, good morning. This morning we're going to change the cylinder head on a 300D turbo diesel. They kept the same cylinder head for several years. This is a turbo model. There's a non-turbo model as well. The cylinder heads will be the same. This cylinder head removal is essentially the same on a 240D as well. What we have is a new cylinder head that's been reworked, or it's been totally rebuilt. And it's easy to show some of the things that we need to do with this cylinder head that we intend to put on there. The one that we have needs a valve job, and so this one has been totally reworked. So we can illustrate a few things with this cylinder head. One of the very first things we're going to do is pull the exhaust and intake manifold and turbo all together. It bolts with 7 bolts onto the passenger side of the car. These 7 bolts is where the intake and exhaust manifold bolts on. In order to take that off, we have to drop the exhaust pipe off of the manifold, off the exhaust manifold. So that's one of the only things we have to do underneath the car for this particular job. The book doesn't even say that you have to do that. The problem I find is that it's heavier if you leave that on there, and since I need to swap it out anyway, I'll take it off before I remove the cylinder head from the car. It's just so much lighter without that assembly on there, and not quite so bulky. If you had a hoist where you were hooking onto the cylinder head with a hoist, you could hoist it out of the car, but I'm just going to get inside the engine compartment and lift it up. I don't know what it weighs. It might weigh 60 or 70 pounds. On the other side of the head is where the glow plugs and the injectors go. The injectors go in these ports right here, and these are water sensors, water temperature sensors and such that screw into the head. One thing we might mention, this head has been reworked, and Mercedes has kind of an exclusive little device they call a pre-chamber that screws, or it actually sits inside the head like that, and then it's held down by a locking nut. And because the head has been worked, the machinist that works the head, in order to make the surface of the head perfectly smooth, you know, they shave a few thousandths of an inch off the head. They mill it down by just a few thousandths of an inch. And so what happens is now this pre-chamber sticks down into the head, or actually the head is thinner, shorter by a few thousandths of an inch because it's been milled off, and that means that this sticks too far into the cylinder. So what we need to do when we have this head redone is move this away from the piston a little bit. So we've got to recess it up into the head a bit. And Mercedes makes, and what you buy is a new spacer. The original spacer and the new spacer are only different by a little bit, but it's enough to make up for the difference. If I take a caliper and just look at it, you can see that it's a few thousandths difference. That one is 75 thousandths of an inch thick, and the new one is 85 thousandths, so it's 10 thousandths of an inch difference in the thickness, which of course that's 0.01 inches. You can't even see it, but it goes right there on the pre-chamber, and so it moves the pre-chamber 10 thousandths of an inch out of the cylinder head, which is just enough to make up for the milling that they had to do to rebuild the head. So in order to install that pre-chamber, it just pops down in there. It's driven down in there. We'll just take a socket or something and tap it into the head. But then we have to be able to screw this thing down to hold it in there. So there's a little keeper. And so you do need a special tool. Unless your machinist has already done this, Mercedes makes a special tool. And we'll show you at the end where to get this tool, and Performance Products has it. You can also buy it on the web. If you go look at tool products, you'll find it on the web, but you see it just goes in there, and then you put a wrench on there and twist that down tight. The other special tools that we need are a special wrench. The head bolts on the Mercedes is what they call a double hex. It's like a Torx, sort of. You see, it's a very, very special bolt. And so the head bolts are removed with this special, it's a 1/2-inch drive tool that you need, and there's nothing else that'll work. You really do have to have this particular tool. We can get the Mercedes number on it there, perhaps. This one happens to be an H-A-Z-E-T, a Hazet, I think is the pronunciation. Hazet or Hazet. It's the, you know, a standard Mercedes brand of tool. And you could get it from your dealer, you can order it from a catalog, but you really do have to have that to remove the cylinder head bolts. And then, of course, we've got to have the wrenches used to adjust the valves. In order to adjust the valves, the valve adjustment right there, they're in real tight spots, and you need a special crooked set of wrenches like that. They're 14 millimeter. And again, we show this on another video of ours, but there's the number on those. You've got to get yourself a set of those wrenches if you don't have them. I rarely use that, but there is a tool to hold that particular nut on the valve spring. Usually I don't need it. So those are to adjust the valves. Another thing we have to do is pull off the injector lines. The injector lines aren't on this head, but they do make a special tool. You don't need it. You can use a standard 17 millimeter open end wrench, but I just find that handy to have. I do so many of these that I went ahead and bought this special tool that takes off the rack, the injector lines, so I'm going to use that. When you put the head bolts back, you really do need some anti-seize compound. It's a lubricant to make sure those head bolts don't catch. It's very, very critical to torque the head bolts to exactly the right specification. It's a very detailed and sequential procedure that we have to use, and so we're going to pay really, really particular attention to torquing these head bolts down. It's so critical on a diesel, and they do really torque tight. You really think you're going to strip them, they torque out so tight. I think that's all the special tools that we need and all the special instructions. So we're going to get started. The rest of the tools are real standard, just regular sets of sockets, and in both drives, a 1/2-inch drive and a 3/8 drive. We're going to need your whole set of sockets, I'm sure, before we're finished with this job. I don't have the open-end wrenches that I'll need laid out here, but we've got standard open-end, box-end wrenches that we'll use. In addition, we really do need a torque wrench. Got to have a torque wrench to do this job. Just can't do it without it. You've got to know exactly what you're torquing those head bolts to. And of course, a big breaker bar is very helpful. And I've got a whole set of standard 1/2-inch drive sockets, including a deep 27 millimeter socket that's used on the front crankshaft bolt to turn the engine over, so we've got to have that. In addition, of course, you need a gasket set. This is a complete head gasket set, so the gaskets for the exhaust manifold, the gasket for the valve cover, the head gasket itself, and all the other gaskets that surround this whole process all come in a kit. So it's called a cylinder head or head gasket kit. Normally what you would do is pull your head off and take it to a machine shop, which is going to take a few days to have your head rebuilt typically, and then come back and install that head back in the car. We happen to have a head, so hopefully we do the whole job in one day, and then we'll just have a head that we'll need to take down and have rebuilt. But the standard procedure is to pull the head off, have the valve job done, and then come back and reinstall the same head. We've done so many of these videos, the very first thing we're going to do is pull this air cleaner off. If you don't know how, just refer to our video on this. We show how to change the standoffs on this air breather, which is, it's a real common problem. They go out. So we're not going to spend a lot of video time repeating a lot of processes that we already show in other videos, because it would take us so much time and to show all of that. One of the very first things we have to do is pull the exhaust pipe off of the manifold. So there are three 12 millimeter bolts, and they're self-locking, and they're right here. One, and then that one is 2, that bottom one is 3. We used a combination of a 12 millimeter deep socket and some open and box in wrenches. This happens to be a little ratchet that's handy, that's flexible. But anyway, we got these 3 bolts off. Now we're going to go underneath and undo the bracket, and then we're just going to drop that away. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to take the bolts off. We're going to leave the bracket on the pipe and take the 2 bolts off here and here. I'm using an air tool. They're 13 millimeters, and so they ought to come off with no problem at all. So sometimes you have to pry these. This one came right off. Try the screwdriver right there. There we go. Okay. So all we want to do is just drop it down out of the way, just so we can get the manifold off of there. So that's all we have to do with that piece. Now we're going to disassemble several pieces that hold this manifold on, including this assembly right here. So we need to drain the water out. We got to drain the water out anyway, so we might as well drain the coolant out of it now, because it's going to be a mess if we don't. So we're going to take the coolant hoses off top and bottom, but first we're just going to drain the coolant out of it from the plug in the bottom. Now we've got the water draining out of the thing, and as well we're pulling the hoses off top and bottom, because they connect to the whole coolant system, of course, that drains the water, or that circulates the water in the head. Okay, so now we're going to pull the exhaust and intake manifolds and the turbo all come together. And so one of the very first things that's in our way to get to the bolts is this little pipe that connects the EGR valve. So the EGR valve right here is connected to the exhaust manifold, and I'm going to take these 2 little 10 millimeter bolts off of there because that pipe is in my way to get to some of the nuts that I need to. It's an 11 millimeter nut that holds the little clamp on. Okay, the next piece we're going to pull is this whole thermostat assembly right here. So the water comes up, from the block into a thermostat assembly, and is connected to the head, of course, so the one wire will just pull it off and get it out of the way. And then there are a couple of vacuum connections. So we're just going to pull these vacuum connections off as well. So this one, you can see I've already slid out of there, and then that. So that's loose. And now there are some bolts, but first we have to take this air conditioner line off 10 millimeter. So that's into a threaded connection right there. So we're going to pull that off. You can pull the hose off right here on top and pull that assembly off of there. Now our objective is to pull this whole assembly off. 2 13 millimeter bolts. I'm using a deep socket. I think there are just 2 unless there's another one hidden underneath. Okay, so that thing, once those 2 bolts are off of there, it's just got a little gasket. It ought to come right off. Yeah, it does. So you can see it's still got water in the block. We're going to drain the block, but first we're going to pull this assembly off so that we can get to the drain plug easier on the block. The next thing we're going to pull is this particular oil feed line to the turbo. We've got to disconnect that. We're also just going to pull this mounting bracket that mounts to the exhaust manifold or intake manifold, but it's also mounted to the block by a bolt underneath there, 13 millimeters. So we're going to have to pull this off as well, but we'll start with this. It's a 6 millimeter hex that bolts these. There's another little 10 millimeter bolt right on top that straps the drain tube down, or I'm sorry, the feed tube. It's feeding oil to the turbo. There's a real nasty bolt that's in the very back of the block that we're going to have to get eventually, but I'm going to save that for a little later. We don't have to take it off right this minute. The air cleaner bracket is held on by 3 13 millimeter bolts, and one of them is kind of nasty. It's underneath, way underneath here. You can't even really see it very well, but it's there. And I always use a wobble socket to get it off. I've got a 13 millimeter socket, a wobble socket extension, a ratchet. But it takes a a little patience to get this particular bolt out of there. Okay, now I got the 3 bolts out of it, and you can see it'll come off real easy. It's we're close to removing the 7 bolts that hold this manifold assembly on there, but there are a couple left on the very back. There's a bolt right here that holds this transmission dipstick line on. I think it's a 13 millimeter, and then there's another little line that's air line. It's a it's a pressure line off the intake manifold, so it has air. Is the 13 millimeter bolt that holds the bracket for the dipstick tube on the automatic transmission. It's gonna hard all the way out, it looks like. The air line is what we call a banjo bolt. It's got holes in it, goes through there like that, seals up the airflow. And obviously this one has not been doing us any good. It's kind of insidious. It broke off there, so we're not getting any special adjustment on our aneroid compensator, which means our fuel's not being enriched at high speeds. So we need to splice that together. We will when we put it back together. Okay, so next is to remove the 7 bolts. They're 17 millimeters that hold the 2 manifold assemblies on there. We're going to take it all off as a unit. The easiest one is right there. Okay, there's one. It's a short bolt. The rest of them are long. There's a second one. I'm going to have a different wrench. There's a third, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, and then a 7th one way in the back. It's going to take a different combination of extensions. Probably one of them might take a wobble socket, but I don't think you'll really have any trouble. I'll give you an example of another easy one right there. So now there's one more wire. There's a little sensor wire up here on pressure. Pull that off, and I think we should be ready to roll in terms of taking this thing off. I think I have everything disconnected. We'll see in just a minute. I got the 7 bolts out, so it should all just come off as an assembly. Gonna have to wiggle it. But this assembly is, of course, much heavier than that. Oh, forgotten all about it. This tube right here is connected to this assembly, but perhaps since we've got it all loose, I think I'm inclined just to leave it sitting right there. Since it's all disconnected, it's all we need to get it away from the head. So that was our objective, was just to disconnect it from the head. I think we'll be able to get the new head on there and just bolt it up without taking it off of there. So let's just leave it right there. We kind of left this piece to show you. Once we get this disconnected, there's a drain on the block. We want to drain the water down away from the head and out of the block. And so there's a block drain. Even though we drained it out of the radiator, it's a 19 millimeter, and you can see the bolt. It's right there. It's a plug, actually. It's a drain plug on the block. And so we want to take that out of there. We've loosened it up. We're going to just take it out and drain what water, if any, is in the block out. There should still be some. Various assemblies off the top of the valve cover. Pull those two. We've shown this many times in our videos. There's 4 13 millimeter bolts on the top. So I just set this thing aside. Just set it out of the way. That way I don't have to disconnect that bone wire to the transmission. I can just set that assembly aside like that. Take this cruise control module out of the way. We always pull this vacuum line. It's the main vacuum line to the brake booster. It's not connected to anything really. It's certainly in the way. We try, as soon as we start working on this side of the engine, we want to get it out of the way because it's so easy to break these two little nipples leaning over on that line. And if you break them, the line is shot. It costs anywhere from $30 to $50 depending upon where you buy it for a new vacuum line. So you're better off just spending a few minutes taking it off of there. Now it matters. The line that goes to the transmission shifting assembly, which is this one, it goes to the top of this little ivory colored thing on the injection pump. That line is metered and it goes to this particular connection. The other unmetered line is all of the rest of the vacuum to the car. These are 19 millimeter nuts, and I had to back one of them up with a 17 millimeter. Okay, next we're going to take off some more of the linkage. Take that piece off, and it takes there's a little cotter pin right here that comes out of there, and usually there's a little pin here. That one's missing. There's a little keeper right on the end of that. This one's gone off of there. Really doesn't matter. And so we pull it forward, and then it slides backward to come out. It should. Sometimes they get a little stuck there. And then we just pull it out of there. I always just put the pin back in there so I don't lose it in that little linkage piece. And so now you can see what we've got there. That's just loose, and we have to pull what's called the rack, which is these fuel lines, these 5 fuel lines that run from the injection pump up to the injector, so we might as well pull them now. As I mentioned, I have a special little tool. You don't have to have it. A 17 millimeter will fit, and so you can use just an open-ended 17 millimeter, and if you don't do this very often, it's fine, but you can see that my tool goes down around there in the hard to get places, and it's kind of an interesting little twisted tool that is really handy to have if you do this very often. Now at this point I always just take the injectors out of there because they're in there tight, and everything is real stable right now, so I got something to work against. First thing you have to do is get rid of these return lines. You can't really save them. I just cut them, everybody does, and then replace them, especially if they're rotten with new lines. If they aren't, you can probably use a piece of that. It's still long enough once you fix the injector. So we'll see how rotten they are, I just don't know. But the first thing we do is cut those. It's got a barb on it is the reason. So with that barb, see, that one is rotten. That barb that's on the injection pump that seals, it just makes it impossible to pull off of there practically. Now the very last one on the back injector has just got a little plug in it. Obviously you can't return from there, so you just see it's got a little plug in there. Don't lose that plug, you're going to need it, it's critical. Set it right up here. Okay, now once we get those off of there, they break loose with a 27 millimeter socket, a deep 27 millimeter socket, and you can see it's got a huge breaker bar on there. So we're going to pull all 5 of the injectors out of there. Well, we got the head still mounted. It's just a lot easier to do it then. Here, there are 5 of them, of course, 1 for each cylinder. A couple of them are in nasty spots, but you can see what we're doing. You see them? Of course, that's a little sensor. We got to pull that wire off too, so might as well do that. Got a couple of the nuts off. See, there's a whole harness. There's a real easy one in front, number 1. It's a lot easier to take the rack off first, as we did, to get to these. One of the things we also have to pull off is this heater hose connected to the back of the head. It's just a real straightforward clamp. So we got that. We'll just move that out of the way, and then we can get to that very last glow plug wire. There are a couple of things that are holding some lines, air conditioning line, in particular right here. So we need to take this bracket It's a 6mm hex. Okay, next we're taking this fuel filter assembly off of here. It mounts to this bracket. Now, we pulled these 2 bolts on top that hold this fuel filter assembly on there. So the bolts are gone. We're just going to be very careful not to break those diesel lines, those fuel lines. We could pull it, but I think that until we have to, we won't. We'll just leave it connected like that. We don't want to break those hard plastic fuel lines that are running to there. What we have to do now is take the power steering pump off and set it aside, because this bracket that holds the power steering pump, while it doesn't actually screw into the head, it has a lip that comes over the top of the head and it's in the way. And so the only way to get the head off is to move this assembly out. We don't want to disconnect the lines, the power steering lines. We want to leave them assembled. We don't want to get power steering fluid everywhere. So what we're going to do is disconnect the power steering pump and set it over here on the side along with this thing. We're going to move it as well as soon as we can. This line is stuck under there, but we'll get it out of the way so we can get this out of the way over here. And then there's some 13mm. The one that loosens up the power steering pump belt is right here. Okay, so there were 3 bolts other than the adjustment bolt we had to take off. You'll be able to see them, they're real obvious. But anyway, this power steering pump, just set it behind this reservoir for windshield washer fluid, and I'll show you where these bolts are now. There's one here that's part of the pivot. There's one here that's part of the pivot. And of course this raises the power steering pump up and down, and then there's one up on top. So we're going to take these out of here because we're going to move this bracket off. So the bracket is right here, and that's the thing that's in our way because it's right on top of the head, and so that's the reason we had to go through all that rigmarole. And so now if we look at the things that are holding it on, if we get the light, we've got a little thing here, a little bolt here that bolts the dipstick tube on, but you can see a bolt right there. It's one of these bolts that holds the bracket on is a 12mm, and one of them is a 13. The big one that's on the outside, the farthest one out, is a 13. Actually, there are 2 13s there. I didn't realize it. They're kind of hidden down there. They're the ones that are way far out away from the engine. The farthest ones, they're 13s. The one that's in closer is actually a 12. So I've got the 12 off already, and now I'm taking the 2 13s. So if I'm correct, now there are 3 total. It's been a while since I took one of these off. I've done it many times, but you forget. Okay, that's gonna come now. So those are the 2 long ones that are 13mm. And then I've got another one in here that I took off that's a 12 right there. And so that one is right in there. And that one is different. Believe it or not, it's a 12mm instead of a 13. So these 2 long ones are 13s, and then the 12 is the shorter one on the inside. And this thing is in the way. I'm going to take it off. It's a 19, it's just a vacuum line, and it's a 19mm. It's just so easy to take off, and it won't be hard to put back. So now my bracket ought to move out of the way, and it does. So you see that they were there, there, and there that held it on, and so those are the ones of concern. So we'll just set this aside. Okay, we got 4 bolts to pull the valve cover off. We're getting really close to pulling head bolts pretty soon here. There we go. Just a washer that I dropped. Okay, we've got the valve cover gasket off, and the next thing we do before we pull these rocker arm groups is loosen, but don't remove the bolt that holds the sprocket for the camshaft, we've usually got to back it up with some kind of a... We just want to loosen it while we've got the opportunity. So we've got that loose, but don't take it off. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is take these rocker arm assemblies off, but we don't want them under a load. So what we have to do is move the crank sometimes to get these things off. They come off with hex bolts here. There are two groups. You see there's a group of two, a group for two. In other words, it operates 4 valves. And then in the back there's a group for 6 valves. So it's 3 bolts on that one. And so what we need to do is take the bolts off and remove the rocker arm groups as the next step. Now I know as well in this process I'm going to have to be turning the engine over, and so I've got a big deep 27mm socket, and it fits on the front bolt of the crankshaft. And so you have to go underneath the car, but it's right down in there. It's the front end of the crankshaft. It just goes right on there, and you want to turn the engine always as you face the engine. Turn it in the direction that it goes. And the direction that it normally rotates is, as you look at it, it's rotating clockwise. And if you ever forget that, you can just look at the fan and see that it would have to rotate in that direction in order to pull air across that engine. Like I said, we're going to pull these rocker groups, and what we might have to do simultaneously turn the engine over to remove the load on the valves, because see the rocker groups are pushing the valves up and down via the camshaft, and so sometimes they get stuck. There's just 2 bolts on the front pair, so we take these 2 bolts out. They are a hex. Let's see what size. I'll tell you what size in a minute. They're 8mm. 8mm hex. We got those 2 out, and then see the rocker assembly comes right out. Now that one wasn't under a load because the valves weren't mashing it. So we'll set this one aside and then take the back one off. The back one has 3 bolts that hold it. They have washers. Now see, that one is a little bit stuck. You got to rotate the engine a little because it won't come without, because of the low socket on it down here. Okay. So now we got that one. Water bypass line that goes from the water pump to the head, and we got to take it off. It's just a little bitty steel line, and it's one of those, again, with banjo bolts, so you got to be careful because those washers on either side of that banjo bolt is going to come off.